So we've quite a few people joining us there. So I'm just going to say welcome to everyone. My name is Holly Kearns. I'm the Learning and Public Engagement Curator here at Butler Gallery. Just to do a little bit of housekeeping at the beginning of this talk, we're gathered together on the occasion of a screening of a reflection on light, a 2015 film by Grace Weir. I'm really delighted to have Grace joining us here at Butler Gallery online for this conversation. The film is currently on view in the in the digital gallery in Butler Gallery. It opened it opened on the 7th of December and it's going to be on until the 23rd of December. For those of you who can make it into Kilkenny, we encourage you to come and see the film here. We're joined by Grace Weir, artist, and Anna O'Sullivan, director of Butler Gallery. And what we're going to do, just in terms of procedure, we have shared the Vimeo link for the film, so I'd encourage everyone to, in a few moments, we will let you know when to hop over to Vimeo, have a look at the film. It's 20 minutes long. And then after about 21 minutes, just to give everyone a bit of grace, we're going to join back on Zoom. Everyone is going to stay logged into Zoom during this time period. We're just going to mute ourselves and then we'll let you know, you'll hear us inviting everyone back. Just to say, for the discussion afterwards, we do encourage questions. So if you go down to the bottom, little buttons at the bottom of your screen, there is a button that says Q&A. So you can click Q&A and ask your questions there, or you can put them into the chat function and I'll be able to direct those questions back to Anna and to Grace at that point. So Anna, I'm going to hand over to you now to introduce.
Great, thank you, Holly. Thank you, Grace. Good afternoon, all, and thanks for joining us. To begin, I just want to give a little background on Grace. Grace Weir represented Ireland at the 49th International Venice Biennale and has exhibited widely, nationally and internationally. She was an artist in residence in Trinity College, Dublin from 2012 to 2015 and had a major solo exhibition at the Irish Museum of Modern Art in 2015 to 16. In 2019, she was commissioned by the Institute of Physics in the UK and Ireland to create an installation, Time Tries All Things, for the inaugural show in the gallery at the Institute of Physics in London. Grace is a Leitrim-based artist who explores different, frequently beautiful and always illuminating perspectives on science. One particular area of Weir's work is her unique approach to research, based on encounters with scientists, philosophers, practitioners from other disciplines, or with specifics such as objects, archives, and locations. The resulting work ranges from cinematic works and installations to paintings, photographic work, lecture performances, and web projects. Established in 1943, the Butler Gallery is an extraordinary resource in its fine collection, which is made up of work acquired by wise purchases, donations, and artworks that are on long-term loan to the gallery. We are privileged to have a number of works by the great Irish artist Mainie Jellett, some of which were donated by Bruce Arnold in the early 1990s and by the Friends of the National Collections of Ireland. We also have the watercolour study and oil on canvas of an extraordinary work, 6 Elements from 1926 by Jellett that is on loan from a private collector. We like to find ways of connecting contemporary artists with works in the collection, and encountering Grace's film, A Reflection of Light, was a fascinating viewing experience and enriched our understanding of the work of Jellett that subsequently involved a further appreciation of the work of Grace Weir herself. A Reflection of Light is a film that consists of a seemingly single shot that travels across different locations and histories to the hanging of a painting, Let There Be Light by Jellett in the School of Physics in Trinity College, Dublin. So we'll move on to give you, the audience, an opportunity to view the film with us here today. And we will begin with the screening and then follow with a few questions. So I'll pull a few questions together for you, Grace, and we can see what we can get through in the time that we have. Mainie played with light, time, and space in her work, as you do yourself in your filmic practice. To what extent did the half-shadow prism invented by Mainie's grandfather, John Hewitt Jellett, influence the development of her work compared to the teachings of Albert Glaise in Paris? or what do you think came first? And I'm going to run into another two small questions, and then we'll see what one you want to answer first. In a reflection of light, does the movement of the camera around the painting, Let There Be Light, seek to emulate the numerous angles introduced in Cubist works? And then also, I'd love to know more about the soundtrack by Linda Buckley, which offers a sonic analogy to the concerns of the film. Did Linda work on it at the same time as you were making the film, or how did that work? So I guess we'll get back to the first question about the extent of the Hash Out of Prison by Mainie's grandfather.
I think she came from, her family was a very intellectual, scientific family. I think and artistic family. So I think, I wouldn't say specifically the prism influenced her. The prism influenced me, but I think that ideas about light and time and all these basic intrinsic questions that are in physics would have been very familiar to her because of her grandfather being a physicist and her uncle being a physicist who was married to her aunt. They were a very close family and they had lots of family gatherings. And, when I was in her house, her grandfather's notebooks were just on the shelf or just in a cupboard. It's very easy to access them and look at them. And I'm quite sure she did the same. So I think she no doubt had an interest in light, probably from her family background. In fact, actually, I think somebody told me that they had seen a book that she'd had as a child, which had something about prisons in it. But really, I think her engagement with Albert Glaze was really the primary basis for her work, and her ideas about what art was and light. It's funny, the prism, her grandfather's prism, which was in that copper instrument that you see actually at one point in the film, you go past it on the stairs. When I came across that on one of my second days in the School of Physics as an artisan resident and saw that it was by J.H. Jellett, that was what made me make the link to Mainie Jellett. I asked, Jellett's a very unusual surname, and I asked, was he any relation to Mainie Jellett, and found out it was her grandfather who had invented this prism. And then I found out that her family had donated a painting of hers to the School of Physics, which was in storage at that time. And I went to see it in storage. And when I saw the painting, which is a prismatic painting, which is a painting of a hand breaking a ray of light into all this color, it was the relationship between these two prisms, her grandfather's prisms and her prism, that really drew me in, and that I was kind of very interested in exploring this pathway between these prisms. I mean, it was also a parallel, absolutely, as an artist who's interested in physics, to discover that Mainie Jellett had this extraordinary history of physics in her family, which I hadn't known about. And, we tend to kind of, we talk about the history of art, we talk about the history of science, and we talk about them in terms of themselves, and we kind of often don't make cross references to what was happening in other fields. And that's something that really interests me. So that was really a revelation to me when I discovered that her family had a very strong connection to physics.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I hadn't actually known which came first for you, the interest in Mainie's paintings and the richness of those paintings, or the science, and that makes a lot of sense. So that was serendipitous kind of, yeah, go ahead.
No, it's just, I mean, I think Mainie Jellett, it's kind of, you obviously, you're growing up in Ireland or studying art in Ireland, you know about Mainie Jellett, but she's kind of placed into a certain way. And it was really with the direct encounter with her work when I saw her actual painting in storage, and I suppose had it in my hands, so to speak, and looked at it, that I realized what an incredible artist she was. That, that you kind of, her bio almost was in her way of actually experiencing the work. It's when you really look at her work closely, I think, I mean,
that painting in the School of Physics is extraordinary. I'd never seen it before. I mean, yes, you would be completely captured by that, and I can see entirely why you'd want to go further with it. Yeah,
I mean, it was like an onion. It's funny how, because her painting was referred to, her paintings, as you know, when she first exhibited them in Dublin, they were received very badly. And in fact, one of them was compared to being like an onion, or a freak picture. But actually, the story of Mainie and physics was like an onion for me, because it kept unfolding. All these layers kept coming away, and it became more and more resonant and interesting to me. And I met, by complete serendipity, I met her nephew, Michael Purser, in Trinity one day, having lunch, literally sat opposite him by pure chance one day and got introduced. And next thing I found out that's her nephew. And he invited me up to her house, and which was on Fitzwilliam Square, just around the corner from Trinity. And when I went to her house and realized that the house was completely unchanged since the time that she lived there. I mean, my dad would have been the same age as my grandmother. You know, she's not that inaccessible, if you like. But when I went into the house, it's like your grandmother's house, you know, but nothing has changed, which is quite extraordinary. And it was when I saw that photo that you see in the film at the beginning of the film, the photo of the family. And it was when I saw that photograph of the family grouped in the exact same room that I was standing in, and that nothing was different. I think there was one painting in the photograph that I wasn't on the wall where it was just in the hall, but everything was unchanged. Yeah. That was actually the moment when I thought I want to make a film here, because that protracted sense of time, that kind of sense of being present and in the past at the same time, that kind of division of time and that kind of heightened present that you have at those moments, was when I really felt like I was already in a film, if you like. So that was when I decided to make a film.
There's a lot of presence of her in that house. I wasn't sure until the very end of the film that there is an estate of Jellett. And is the family still involved, and who runs it, and can one visit that house? You were very lucky to get in there.
Well, actually, they seem to be. Brian Fay actually was telling a story there recently, that he was standing outside the house, looking at the house, and he met a family member who invited him in. They seem to be very open to people going in. I mean, Michael Purser, her nephew, I think, would be the main running of her estate, so to speak. But no, I find them. They were totally open to me coming in. I was there many times, and what's great about that house is it's not museum-like. It's completely like a home. Like the rugs on the ground, you know, that Mainie designed, they're on the ground still. People are walking on them. You know, I was at a party there. It was, you know, it's a very relaxed family home. And
do people live there actually now?
Yes. Yes. Michael Purser's son lives on the top floor now with his partner, Sonia Krall, the photographer who's also in the film. And Sonia Krall is using Mainie's studio. So it's the family, it's really a strong artistic family tradition. As I said, and the grandfather's notebooks are there, probably on the same shelf he put them in, because he lived there before her. So it's this fantastic, unchanged time, but yet completely lived in. So it's not like
the home of Alice Neal in New York, where her apartment is left exactly as she left it when she passed away. Paintings on easels and all the living artifacts around. It's really amazing when someone allows that to happen, so that you can kind of venture into the, you know, get that presence of the artist's life. And it, as you said, must have been a really rich experience wandering around.
It's extraordinary because it's so used. Like her nephew, Michael Purser, ran a business from there. Her studio, I think at one point, was his office, but he still had the piano and he'd bring people in. So it's the lack of, it's not museum-like. It's interesting when you encounter art outside of museum-like conditions, but yet it has a certain resonance. You know, it's different. And but it's very extraordinary that it's so well used and lived in, and yet it's unchanged. You know, so
you really captured that in the film. I wondered, going back to one of the earlier questions, and I might be just projecting on my part, but does the movement of the camera around the painting let there be like seek in some way to emulate the angles of Cubist works?
Yeah, I think, you know, I was interested in the idea of you know, I've actually long been interested in Cubism from prior to doing this residency in the School of Physics. I've always been interested in that period, that early part of the 20th century. It's a very interesting period, both in terms of art and Cubism and in science, in terms of relativity and Einstein's work. But yeah, the camera, for me, the painting was the kind of constant. The painting was the kind of constant thing, and everything else changes around it. So it's, yes, exactly like in a Cubist painting, when you see an object from many different sides and angles. For me, the painting is the constant. You see it you see the room it was painted in, you see an exhibition it's in, and then you see it in its final home where it's permanently home. So it's the painting is a kind of constant, and you weave time and life and history is woven around that idea of the painting as a kind of constant. So that was the kind of...
Yeah, great. Have you gone, seem to be on pause with you there now. Maybe the Leitrim internet has stalled on you. I wonder if you're back in yet, Grace?
I might just join you, Anna, because it does seem that Grace is frozen. We'll just give her a few minutes to see if that comes back. Just to jump into the conversation, just in Grace's absence, because one thing that struck me in re-watching the film, and of course every time you watch a film or encounter an artwork, it kind of expands for you. We seem to have lost Grace totally there. Hopefully she'll come back now in a moment. But just the idea of subjectivity actually really struck me. And throughout Grace narrates the film herself, and throughout the discussion, and she's kind of going backwards and forwards between scientific discussion and she seems to be back there now, and artistic critique. Hi, Grace.
Hi, sorry, I don't know what happened there. I seem to have gotten... Look,
thanks for coming back.
Why don't you finish your point there, Holly? Do you want to finish your point?
Well, I was just, Grace, I was just in your absence there, just commenting on what struck me in watching the film again was the idea of subjectivity. And I suppose in the way that we understand cubism and how it's typically discussed as this movement of the object. And you emphasize so much throughout the film the movement of the viewer. And it's particularly in that discussion of Schrodinger's theories on perception and perception related to the eye was just really interesting for me to kind of bring that out in Jellett's work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I said, I think there was a very particular zeitgeist. It's the zeitgeist. People are. I really get fed up when people say, "Oh, are Cubist artists illustrating ideas in science or science, whatever." I'm like, I think it was a zeitgeist at the time. There was a zeitgeist. It was very much a changing period, and time was at the heart of it. Like time and movement, the concept of movement and time were very much at the heart of that period. I always say when I think about Cubism, you have to remember that on July the 1st, 1913 was when Paris sent out the first time signal around the world, all the world set their clocks to an agreed time. That was only in 1913. Before that, everyone had their local time. They had balloons that raised or things that dropped, and everyone set their time to solar noon, which of course is different to Greenwich Mean Time. So it was only 1913 that the world said this is the time, and that was when they divided the earth into 24 time zones and determined the length of the day. So it was a very dynamic time, because when that happened, people started to stop thinking about time in terms of succession of one thing after another, and they started to think about simultaneity, things happening at the same time. Right now in Japan, or right now in Paris, or right now, this kind of concept is a new concept for people to think about. All things happening at once. So this is a zeitgeist. And so then obviously in Cubism, you have this kind of breaking down of an object, knowing it conceptually as opposed to perceptually, and kind of looking at things from multiple viewpoints. So I think it's very much a zeitgeist that was happening in art and science at the time. And what's really interesting to me is at this 1913, we set the time, we said, this is the time. And it was in 1913 that happened. In 1919, only 6 years later, Einstein's theory of relativity was actually proven by Eddington, who went on this expedition and showed that starlight was bent around the sun. And when that happened, that was plastered all over the front pages of all the newspapers. Like Mainie was 20, I think, 21, and she was studying in London. And the front pages of all the newspaper had Newtonian world view overthrown, new universe. It was huge news, bigger than Higgs and Bose or whatever we've had in our time. So I think for her, it must have been extraordinary to be 16 when the world said this is the time it is, and then to be 21 or 22, and this kind of idea of a fixed idea of time gets actually thrown away. So this debate immediately started around then about things in motion or things in still or fixed, you know. So I think time for me, which is a big interest in me in my work, ideas about time were really being discussed and really heightened at that period. So I think Mainie would, of course, been influenced by that. Mainie would have been, of course, influenced by these ideas. You know, who wouldn't be? You know, it's the zeitgeist. It was in the papers. She would have read about it, and she would have known about these things quite a lot from her family, who are physicists. So they would have known what it meant when Einstein's theories were proven. And I mean, we still haven't really come to grips with that in our own time. But so I think these are all definite influences of the period.
May I ask that, because I'm intrigued by, you know, the fact that you're inspired by scientific and mathematical theory in the works in your film. How did you get into science and math? Was it a facility of yours? That, you know?
Yeah, I was a maths and physics kid in school, certainly. And I, before the Great Divide happens, and the Great Divide happens to us all, like we, you know, and I don't really agree with this twin culture, this separate culture, twin culture, these master narratives, art, science. I'm like, I follow trajectories of thinking. I follow certain ideas, and those ideas have led me back into science or into philosophy or into collaboration. It's because I am pursuing a certain line of thinking that's how I've gotten into it. But I suppose I would loosely say that time has been a big interest for a long time, time and space and representation. And those ideas time is intrinsic to filmmaking, but it's also intrinsic to physics. It's also intrinsic to an understanding of history. So of course, I'm going to go and speak to physicists about what is time, or what is our understanding of time. If I want to explore an idea in history in film, you know, so it's kind of, so I sort of see my crossover if my interest is when I'm doing something, you know, it brings me into different fields. Questioning things has brought me places. I haven't deliberately said I'm going to collaborate with a scientist. I wanted to understand time, and I knew somebody who knew a physicist and who kindly agreed to have a cup of coffee with me. I mean, I think it's quite funny. Our physicists laugh when I say I met somebody for a cup of coffee to try and understand relativity. It's not, you know, that wasn't really possible. 18 months later, I understood relativity, and it was a very sublime moment, a very panic attack moment almost, because it was so extraordinary it was a very sublime, extraordinary moment to understand time better than I think we're very sophisticated about space. I always say that. I think we're very sophisticated about space. Hyperspace, you know, multi-space. We're quite sophisticated about space, ideas about space, but we're still, well, less so now, but we still have a kind of linear sense of time. And really, that's not what time is. Time is not, and clocks are just things that tick regularly. They have nothing to do with time. So when you understand that, when you talk to physicists, when you're really working with people who are talking about those ideas, then I bring that back into my understanding of making a film. So yes, to go back to your comment about the film, I did want the film to have a kind of, to weave a trajectory around thinking about the painting.
And what about Linda Buckley's input? Did you work closely with her?
Linda, I met Linda. The film was made, actually. I met Linda, and I got a wonderful creative bursary fund from Trinity to work with Linda, which was great. So I was able to commission her. And when I met Linda, you know, Linda's an extraordinary musician. What I wanted, I think what I asked Linda was, I wanted her to make the sound before an orchestra plays. It's like that moment, that kind of heightened moment just before an orchestra plays, and you might get an odd little note, you know, that they're tuning up or something, but it's that very heightened present. Again, it's this heightened present, because that's what interests me about cinema. I think film puts you in the present tense very firmly, and the shaping of that is what interests me. So I asked her to make a soundtrack that was almost without sound, and really only the sound, if you listen closely to the soundtrack, it's only at the very end that it actually plays a little. You know, before that it's just little bits of notes coming in, but it has that great tension. And I was interested because, you know, it's interesting how music has that ability to be abstract, actually, and for us to not look for it to be representative, that we accept it in an abstract way, more readily than, and you know, all this, just when you read about Mainie's work and you read about people criticizing it and people saying, looking for what does it mean and what does it represent, and you know, I think, and they openly say that herself and Glaze and quite a few of the artists or the Cubists say that they were seeking harmony and rhythm and movement, and they make a parallel to music themselves. I mean, Mainie was also a very good musician, and her sister Bay, who's the lady smoking the cigarette in the photograph. Yes, brilliant. She was actually the musical director in the Gay Theatre at that time, at the beginning of the Free State. So the Gay Theatre was showing American farces and plays by Ibsen at the very moment that you had Lady Gregory and William Butler Yeats in the Abbey putting on this Irish national identity program. Yeah, they were a kind of they were modernists. They were European modernists. They were like, we can be European and we can be modern. We don't have to be Irish Catholic. So I always think of Mainie, there was a lot of bias against, a lot of prejudice against her because she came from a Unionist Protestant background, but yet she was a real voice and pioneer for the new state, for the Free State, the new state of Ireland. She dedicated herself to wanting people to understand, to understand abstraction or understand what art could bring to them. I think, so I admire her greatly for that. Like, I think, you know, I mean, as I said, it's an extraordinary time, and I think it's hard for us to understand that time without thinking about that, what it was like to be living in that time. And our identity was a huge issue then. Like, people, that was a huge issue. Who are we going to be now that we were finally out of British colonial rule? And Mainie was a great advocate for that, to remind us of our connections to Europe, you know, and I admire for that. I mean, besides the fact that she set up the Irish Exhibition of Living Art, but you know, but she also taught and she spoke on the radio and she gave lectures. And when you read her writings, you can feel this great energy, this great pioneering energy. And she talks about that this isn't a good time. She says this isn't a good time, but we're building a better time. There will be a better time in the future, and we're building that time now. So,
and it's such a shame that she died so young.
Yeah, really, you see, that's the key. I mean, she died. She's 46, you know, and you know, and it's also if she had stayed in Paris, because she was first showing in Paris with Glaze and other very important Cubists, and she worked with Glaze, and I get really irritated when I read, you know, it's like these standard simplified histories. They say, oh, she was Glaze's student, and then some people say, oh, she was derivative of him, which is completely untrue. She had a very strong style. She was an incredible colorist. I mean, she's an extraordinary colorist, and she had her own identity. And she corresponded with Glaze for years afterwards, back and forth, herself and Evie Hone. And Glaze himself actually credits her hugely with the development of his work as an artist, and to him writing that book, Painting and Its Laws. I mean, I have a piece here I could read, but he just, from him, which is when he said, I'm hugely indebted to them, that it was in teaching them that I learned myself what I was interested in. So they had a dialogue. So there was a correspondence. It wasn't this master student. They corresponded as equals. And when they first went to him, he said, I have nothing to say to you. He had nothing to, and they just watched him work. And then they started talking. And he said it was through teaching them that it helped him to articulate his ideas, and then to write a book about it. And he hugely credits them. So I think, you know, history tends to have a very quick dismissive, you know, Mainie's Protestant, she's from a privileged background, though also that's also not completely true. And she was Glaze's student. And I'm like, well, if you look a little bit more closely at that, you can see they had a real dialogue. They had a real dialogue back and forth, and he himself credits her. So it was the time. It was the, you know, it was women were, I mean, when she went to art college in London, she could only attend at night. Women weren't allowed to go in the daytime. And when they would go in at night, the men would have knocked over all the tables on the ground, you know, that the women had to pick up. It was, you know, so she was quite a radical, brave woman to go in there and pick up her table and paint, and to go to Paris and to knock on the door of this artist and say, we want to study under you. We want to work with you. And
we have a lovely selection of works by her, of which kind of charts her work, because it shows representational figuration in the art class in art school, and then it moves into her discovery of cubism in a pencil drawing. And so it's a really nice storytelling for us, for our visitors, to be able to show that art school drawings and inks on paper into the cubism, and then the more refined and resolved paintings, which it's lovely to be able to, almost like a catalogue resonate, to be able to tell that story of the trajectory of the artist. And we love that we were able to share that with our visitors. But yeah, it would have been interesting to see where she would have gone with her work.
Absolutely.
Where she would have taken that.
Absolutely. And she set up Irish Exhibition of Living Art, and as you know, Anna, that was not an easy thing to do. To set up anything, to establish, to establish at that time, 1944, to establish this exhibition, which was against the Academy, which was to be an alternative to the Academy, to set up another type of thing. And she worked on it right up until her death, but she didn't make the opening, so it's very sad, but it's again. And also I think, actually Bruce Ireland mentions that in a book, that because she returned to Ireland from France at the beginning of the Free State, and because she was so slammed in her work by critics, it propelled her into this position of being an advocate for modernism, or for abstraction, or other kinds of art than the kind of art that was being prioritized by the state at the time. It took her away from her work. In a way, she worked very hard at that, and she set up this exhibition. She wasn't just an artist, if you like. She was also doing all these other things, besides teaching, to bring in an income to her family, because her family obviously suffered a great loss of income with the birth of the Free State. But they stayed. She was Irish. She had no relationship with it. She said she had no relationship with England. She spent 2 years in England, and other than that, she had a very strong relationship with France. She was European. To me, she was absolutely European, and had a huge love of Ireland. But we have her pigeonholed. People just go, "Oh, Protestant privilege," and I'm like, well, they actually lost a lot of their money, and I think, and they go, "Oh, and religious," So we're too quick, and I have found with her work that a close look at it, really close look at her work, is so enriching. The interiority of her work is extraordinary. There's so much going on there, and there's so much of what she wanted art to be, and what she believed art to be, and her sense of color is just extraordinary. Actually, I don't know who it was, somebody said there the other day about a quietude. There's a quietude to her works that bears close viewing, and so that's she certainly caught my imagination.
Absolutely. We're so familiar with her in Ireland, but she could have had a real world, she could have operated on a world stage.
If she stayed in Paris, she probably would have.
Yeah, absolutely. Holly, I think maybe we could open it up now to see if there's possibly any questions.
Yeah, so just to remind everyone, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So if you do have a question, you can put it in there. We'll give people a few minutes. We're nearly at 2 o'clock, but we do have a little bit of time to run over if people do have questions. Just to say, Grace, it's so interesting to hear you speak about Mainie Jellett, and I think that in terms of the way that we discuss art, I think you're right. A lot of work gets very reduced into the sort of just closing down of history into a series of facts that are, universally known, which of course is quite limited. And we are quite lucky to have this collection of Mainie Jellett's work, and it's been a real privilege to be able to have your film, and just for people who haven't been able to come in and see it, that it is adjacent to the room with all of the Mainie Jellett work and the work that is on loan to us, and the visitor walks through that room into a kind of narrow corridor. So there's a kind of shift of space there as well, through the glass corridor into the digital gallery to be able to see the film. So I think it's a really rich experience.
Just one last question, if you don't mind. Just to sort of end it, your last major work was Time Tries All Things, commissioned for the Institute of Physics in London in 2019. What are you working on now? I'd be keen to know what's...
I'm working on a couple of different things. I'm working on a film that I hope to shoot in Italy next year. All delayed. You know, everything. Pandemic has delayed a great deal. But I also spent.
What's that about? Okay, sorry, put you in the spot.
Yeah, it's based in a specific location. It's kind of a mountain with a lot of caves in it, a mountain of holes, which kind of interests me. And a very specific house there which has certain artworks in it. Again, kind of it was by accident staying there that I encountered these artworks in this house, and then found out the history of the mountain that the house is on. And that kind of encounter has set off another whole train of thinking, which I'm kind of, I would loosely describe it as maybe it's going to be kind of a geography of an art history or sort of a, you know, it's kind of I'm interested in the mountain as well as these artworks and their relationship to it. And I'm also working on a series of photograms, painted photograms. I luckily managed to get into the darkroom, the gallery of photography a few times during in between lockdowns. And I've made a whole series of photograms which I'm painting, and they're photograms made with by capturing light through prisms, which I'm then overpainting with these non-light fast inks. So it kind of interests me, this kind of trajectory between the fixing of the light in the darkroom to light actually unfixing the colors as they naturally will fade in sunlight because they're non-light fast ink. So it's that kind of, there's a temporal trajectory within those still works. So time is still there. So that's... We
do have a question here from the floor. Clodagh has asked, what happened to the Living Art exhibition?
Actually, my partner, Joe Walker, told me that he was in his first exhibition was in the Irish exhibition of Living Art, and it was their last exhibition. And I'm going to guess that was roughly in the early 80s. I don't know the exact date. Yeah, it stopped. I don't know. Anna, do you know? I don't know.
And I think I was actually in it myself. It was in the Douglas High Gallery.
Yeah. He just said, you know, the very first show I was in was the Irish Exhibition of Living Art. And just this morning, and he said that was the last year they held it. So it obviously ran for maybe 40 years. And I guess at that point, it was set up to be in contrast to the academy, you know, so maybe by the 80s, we had lots of other options.
Yeah, the Royal Library
gallery spaces. Yeah, so there wasn't so much a need for an exhibition to show which was not being shown, you know. So, or maybe I don't know the ins and outs of it, but there you go. I just found that out this morning.
Probably funding and whatnot. There's something there from Liam Callahan, my old buddy.
Okay, yeah, sorry, just so Liam says, wonderful to see the film so interestingly and skillfully interwoven in great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I think that might wrap it up. That's been really fascinating, Grace. Thank you so much for your time and your insight into the film. It's just it's really added another layer to going back to seeing it, and being able to see it just before our chat was really rewarding. So thank you very much indeed. The best of luck with the next body of work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just to say to everyone, the work is on a show here in Butler Gallery until the 23rd of December. So there's still a chance to come in and see it. A few more thank yous there. Super work from Grace as usual, and a few thanks for the conversation.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Happy Christmas.
You too. Bye-bye.